beautiful people, and welcome. In today's video, we're going to start talking about how to prove triangles are congruent, okay? This is if they give you two triangles and they say, hey, prove that these triangles are congruent. There are particular things that we can use to prove triangle congruence, and then there are other things that we cannot use. So in this video, we're going to be talking about two different ways to prove triangles are in fact congruent. As always, disclaimer time. If you catch a mistake, I apologize in advance. I am human. Mistakes can and will happen. Just a way of life. Let me know where the mistakes occurs so that way we both can learn from my mistake. If you hear anything in the background, that is Miss Sylvanas. She is being a happy kitty right now. All right, let's get started. So when proving triangles are congruent, we're going to be focusing on two ways. Now, memorization is key, but you don't really have to memorize these because it's in the name. If you're in my class, you should know this by now that mathematicians are what? We're lazy, okay? We're kind of lazy. So we're not creative when we're naming things, and I'll show you an example. I'll show you two examples. So the first way to prove that two triangles are congruent is a SSS. So now I personally don't call it SSS because that just takes too long to say. I call it like a snake. You get it? Like a S. So one way to prove that triangles are congruent is by S. And what that really stands for is side, side, side. So again, mathematicians are lazy, so we're not going to say side, side, side. We're going to say S. What that means is all three sides are congruent. Congruent. To all three sides. And that maybe is unclear, so I'm going to say there are three pairs of congruent sides. And how that looks like is if you have, I'll do an example here real quick. If you have a triangle, let's do one that's pretty small. And you have, let's say this side's congruent, this side, this side, this side, this side. If you have 1, 2, 3 congruent pairs, then that means that these two triangles are in fact congruent to each other. That's a triangle. That's what I get for trying to do this very quickly. All right, so the first method to proving triangles are congruent is by second one. Another way to prove triangles are congruent is by Miss SAS. I call her Miss Sass. She is Miss Sassy. She is Sassy Pants. But you will hear me say Miss Sass. Now, Miss Sass represents a side angle and a side. Now, this is very specific to the angle has to be between two sides. We call this an included angle. It's included. It's not left out. It's included. It's in the middle. So what that means is on one triangle, if you have a side, an angle on the inside, and a side, congruent with a side, angle on the inside, and a side, if these match up, then you have angle congruence. Excuse me, then you have triangle congruence. So, there is two things, side, 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 and SAS. We're going to talk about how we're going to use SAS and to solve. I think this is the first time in the semester that we're not necessarily going to be working with numbers. Numbers may be an example or two, maybe on one test question, but everything we're doing in this unit, in this section, is going to be writing, and it's going to seem a little bit foreign, it's going to seem a little different, but that's okay. I truly believe in every single one of you that with some practice, if you really, truly practice these and work on memorizing, work on what each section means, what does side, side, side mean, what does SAS mean, what does SAS, what does means, you truly can be successful in this unit. How we are going to structure our questions. So our questions, let me put a thinking bubble here. It's going to be a pretty large thinking bubble just to separate my work. So in this section, we're going to be talking about proofs. And depending on who your teacher is, there are two ways to prove something. Specifically with triangle congruence, you can either prove it in a paragraph form, or you can prove it in a two-column. See if I can spell today. We call this a two-column proof. A paragraph proof is exactly what it sounds like. You write your proof in a paragraph like you're in English class using mathematical language. A two-column proof is what we're going to be using in our class, and it's just an easier way for you to organize your thoughts before moving on to a paragraph proof. So again, the reason we are starting with the two-column proof is to help you organize your thoughts. After that, we then will move on to a paragraph form. So how you're going to always structure two columns. So here's column 1, column 2. In this column right here, you're going to write statements. In this column, you're going to write reasons. And if you're in my class, if you've been watching my videos, there are two questions that are super important. And I said we're going to use these two questions for the rest of the semester. Question number 1 is, what do we have? Question number 2, what does that mean? Here I'm also going to write why, because it's a reason. You're going to be explaining why. But a lot of times if we know what we have and what that means, you're going to have your reason. You're going to have your explanation. So on one side, on the left-hand side, you're going to tell me what you have in the form of statements. On the right-hand side, you're going to tell me what does that mean in a form of a reason. How you're going to label that is you're going to label them numerically. Like every step that you take, every move that you make, I won't be watching you, but I will be grading you. Every statement must have a reason. If you write something down, you must have a reason for doing so. If you are doing something without a reason, you got to stop and check yourself, okay? Everything you do in life has a reason. The same way as everything you're going to be doing to prove that triangles are congruent will have a reason. Okay, so your setup, you're always going to do this. You're always going to write statement. You're always going to write reason. You're going to answer my two questions. What do we have? What does that mean? And then you're going to do that. One last thing before we move on to example 1. Your first reason should always be given. Now, the statement changes with every example. But always, 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 the first thing you need to write down is whatever the given information is. You cannot do anything unless you know where to start. All right, deep breath, in and out. Let's start with example number 1. All right, so now we're moving on to example number 1. Now, in example number 1, the direction is saying, let me move that up just a little bit, determine if two triangles are congruent. If they are, state how you know. So far, the reason we know are, and I'm going to just write them off to the side here. I understand you don't have this worksheet at home. That's okay. Take a moment to draw these. Pause the video. Draw these. And then come back to the video. So I will not be stopping at every single example. I will be moving forward. So take a moment now to pause and copy down examples 1, 2, 3, 4 right here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pause the video, copy these down. All right. Now that you have those copied down, we have Miss SAS. We also have other things. Now, one of the things I'm going to be bringing back is originally when we were talking about parallel lines cut by a transversal, some angles, if you have parallel lines, you can use those congruents. Another thing that we talked about that was not specific, it was not specific to parallel lines, are vertical angles. Another thing that we know, that are congruent are 90-degree angles. They're the same, equal in measure. And another thing that we know are congruent are, and I'm going to call them folded up angles. Folded up sides. And I will show you, let me grab some scissors. And I'm going to show you an example. So what I mean by a folded up side is, let's say we have, I'm going to scooch this up just a little bit so that way we have, there we go. All right, so for an example, let's say we have, I don't know. Let's say we have a square. Pretend that's a pretty square. Out of this square, I want to create two triangles. So how would you do that? So here's I'm going to cut it out real quick. I understand that I should have just kept the Post-it note as my square, but hey, live and learn. Okay, here's my square. And I want to cut this so I can have two triangles. So I'm going to cut it like this. I'm going to cut it this way, like that. Okay, and so then, originally, I should have done this before I cut it, but again, live and learn. So this is A, B, C, I don't know if I can do that, D. So those were my A, B, C, D angles. Now that I cut it, do you notice how my B and D kind of split? Now, I don't want to say that they split in half because we don't know that. We don't know how they split. But what I can't say is that B and D are the same, because you can also say, hey, look, if I flip them over, they're exactly the same length, but if I flip them over on top of each other, if I can pick this up, that would be great. Did you see that? That just flew away from me. If I flip it over, it's on top of each other, and this length is the same, therefore, they're congruent. All right, let's do some. Let's do some. Now, folded up sides, you can't use that as your reason. Okay, you can't use that as your reason. So why is something the same? You can't use it. So let me actually bring you back to your notes. So I know I said we're going to start in example number 1, but I take that back. We're actually going to list out the reasons things are congruent for angles and sides. I think that's super important before we begin, because we're going to have statements, but we don't necessarily have a reason. So reasons, sides are congruent. So when you're doing your column, this is what can be in your left-hand side. So when you have your column, your reasons, you get to list them here. So the first thing that you can say is it's given. Second thing you can say is definition of midpoint. So what this means is a midpoint will create, you don't have to write this in your reasons, you're just going to write definition of midpoint, but for you to know what it means that a midpoint will create two congruent sides. So if you recall, if this is the midpoint, this side and this side are congruent. So another thing you can use for side congruence is the reflexive property. This is the one that I called folded sides. Sometimes you'll hear it called as flipped sides. Okay, what that means is it's the same line twice. So those are your reasons for sides to be congruent. Now, your reasons for angles. So first thing, always, it's given. So basically, what we are listing is a cheat sheet for you when you are proving triangle congruence. All you have to do is have this page out, pick which one you need, and write it down. So how do we know angles are congruent? Well, if they tell us angles are congruent, we know they are congruent. Another reason that we have angle congruence is vertical angles. And if they tell us we have parallel lines, again, only if they tell us we have parallel lines, then we can use alternate interior, alternate exterior, corresponding, and then also, this is not, so only this is for parallel lines. This is separate. We can also use the definition of angle bisector. This means that a bisector will create two congruent angles. Ooh, you can't see that. I apologize. Keep trying to zoom out for you guys to see. Okay. So this is your cheat sheet. You're looking at your cheat sheet. Another reason that we didn't put, but for both, you can also have what we talked about in our previous video. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So if you know that two triangles are congruent, then you know that everything is congruent. Therefore, you are done. Okay, now let's go back to example number 1. Example, let me switch this down. There we go. Okay, so determine if two triangles are congruent. If they are, state how you know. It's not asking us to prove. Okay, it's definitely not asking us to prove anything. So that's okay. But it's just telling us, are they congruent? Do you have side, angle, side? Or do you have side, side, side? Or is it not congruent at all? Well, let's look here. I have a side. So I have one tick mark and one tick mark. Let me zoom in all the way so you guys can see this. So a side, do you notice how you have two triangles? You have one triangle here. And your second triangle is here. So you have one tick mark, two tick marks, two tick marks. And then do you see how this line is shared? Let me make sure this is not blurry. There you go. Do you see how this line is shared? It's on the yellow and it's on the, let's call it pink. So because they share the side, it is the same side, so it is congruent to itself. So what do we have? We have side, 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 side. So therefore, this is congruent by side, side, side. Let's move on to number 2. What do we have? I have an angle. I have an angle. I have an angle, 90-degree angle. And then what do I have? I have vertical angles. Do you see how this is an X? Vertical angles. So I have angle, angle, angle. I have angle, angle, angle. Unfortunately, angle, angle, angle is not one of our congruence statements, so it is not congruent. Let's move on to the next one. Again, I have angle, 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 so not congruent. And then what do I have here? I have a side, an angle, angle, and then do you notice how, again, this is on the yellow and also is on our pink triangle. So it's the same line twice, therefore it is congruent. So then what do I have? I have a side, angle, and a side. Do you see that? Side, angle, side. Side, angle, side. So then our congruence is side, angle, side, congruence. State what additional information is required in order to know that the triangle is congruent. So basically on this question, starting at number 5, 6, 7, and 8, they're telling you they are congruent. Make these triangles congruent by side, angle, side. So if we know we have a side, we want to know that they are congruent. Okay. First thing I notice is that we have vertical angles, so I'm going to put a tick mark here. So I have a side, an angle, and a side. Then we know that these two are congruent. So now I have a side, an angle, and a side. So what information do I need? I need to know that these two are congruent. So if HC is congruent to HI, then we have side, angle, side. So if we do not have that information, we do not have side, angle, side. So this is what's missing. We are finding the missing information. Okay, let's try here. We're trying for Miss SAS. We want side, angle, side. So what do we know? We know that these is congruent. How do we know that? Because it is reflexive. It is on top of each other. So what do we need? So what information is missing? In order to have side, angle, side, we need to know that angle FGH is congruent to angle EGH. If we do not have this information, we cannot assume that these are congruent. We have to know that these two are congruent. This is what's needed. Okay, I'm going to actually do a different 7 and 8 because I want you guys to practice how to write actual proof statements. So let's do one. Whoop. Sorry about that. That's my scratch paper underneath. Okay. So what we have is given. So this is example 7. Given PQ is congruent to ST, QR is congruent to TR, and R is the midpoint of segment PS. Prove triangle PQR congruent to triangle STR. All right, let's talk about how this works. Step number 1, I'm not going to list this out, but listen to what I'm saying. Step number 1, draw your table. On the left-hand side, you're going to write statement. On the left-hand side, you're going to write reasons. You're going to write 1 on both sides. Your first reason is always given. Always, always, always. And before I get too far in my proof, I did leave out a picture. So they're going to give you a picture. So your picture is also what's given. Okay, this is the picture that they give you. This is the information they give you. This is what you're trying. This is your objective, your goal. Okay. Step number 1, in our previous videos are always mark it up. Mark up your triangles. That's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to mark it up with the given information. So what is given? Take each statement, copy, paste. Copy, paste, copy, paste. So first statement is PQ is congruent to ST. How do we know that PQ is congruent to ST? They tell us that information. Second piece of information, QR is congruent to TR. How do we know? Again, if you write something down, you must have a reason. How do you know that these two segments are congruent? Well, they tell us. 3, what's the third piece of information? R is the midpoint. How do you know that R is the midpoint? Well, they tell us. So you have to write given. So that's all of the information that they give us. Make sure you mark up your triangle. So QR is congruent to TR. R is the midpoint, so we know that R is the midpoint. So how do we get to this statement? How do we know that this triangle is equal to this triangle? So my last statement here, whatever number it's going to be, will be will be triangle PQR is congruent to triangle STR. So you're always going to start with given, end with this statement, because you are going to finish with proving triangle congruence. Now, we don't know the reason yet, and we don't know how many steps are in the middle. So what am I trying to prove? So far, I have either side, 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 or side, angle, side. Those are my reasons. So here in my reason, it's going to be this one or this one. Later on, we're going to learn more. So what do I have? I have a side, 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 side. So what do I know? Since they tell us we have a midpoint, step number 4 is, what do we know about a midpoint? So I'm going to look at my cheat sheet. Where's my cheat sheet? There it is. And I'm looking for midpoint. The only time you can use midpoint is our keyword. Keyword is midpoint. So I'm looking for my keyword. Keyword, midpoint. Midpoint will create two congruent sides. So here's my midpoint. These two are congruent. So here's my midpoint. And I'm going to just draw it like it is. These are congruent. Okay, so then what is congruent? What do you have? What did you create? What do you have? So we have segment PR congruent to segment. You can say RS or you can say SR, doesn't matter. How do we know they are congruent? Well, what did we do? How did we figure this out? Well, we used the midpoint, but we used the definition of midpoint. So we write that definition. And this is why it's super duper important to mark up your triangles, because visually you should see that you have a side, 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 side. You have, therefore, these two are congruent. So now this is step number 5. You have these triangles equal to each other. How do you know that? Because side, side, side congruence. Let's do one more and call it good for this video. Example 8. I'm going to try to find a good one. All right. Given KM is congruent to N. Let's not do that one. Let me take that back. Given AD is congruent to AB, and AC bisects angle DAB. Bisect is just a fancy way to say cut in half. What do we want? We want to prove that triangle ADC is congruent to triangle ABC. And again, they will always give you a picture. That's how the picture looks like. Again, pretend it's perfect. I am not a computer. Step number 1, always mark up your triangle. For your reason, you're always going to start with given. Statement, you're always going to start with listing things out that are separated by commas. So AD is congruent to AB. Mark that. AD is congruent to AB. Second, AC bisects angle DAB. How do we know that? It's still given. Okay. So how do we mark this up? What does that mean? So I'm looking back at my cheat sheet. Okay. So an angle bisector right here, angle bisector, a bisector will create two congruent angles. So if we have an angle bisector, here's our angle, it just cuts it in half. So then this angle is congruent to this angle. So since we have AC being an angle bisector, that means this gets cut in half and these get cut in half. Now, the angles on C are not the same as the angles on A. We don't know that. But we know that angle A gets cut in half and we know that angle C gets cut in half. So step number 3, how did we know this? We used the, what did we use? The definition, and I'm going to abbreviate definition with defin, of angle bisector So definition of angle bisector, what did that tell us? That told us that angle DAC is congruent to angle CAB. So now what do I have? I have a side, an angle, and, oh, did you guys catch that? I almost didn't catch that. Do you see how this line right here is the same line on both triangles? So that's congruent. So how do we know that, step number 4, how do we know that segment AC is congruent to segment AC? And that is the same line twice, so it is the reflexive property. So now what do I have? I have a side, an angle, and a side. Side, angle, side, side, angle, side. So then my last, anything that I write is going to be my proof statement. So triangle ADC congruent to ABC. How do we know that they're congruent? By Miss SAS. All right, guys, we're going to do so much more of these. This is very difficult. I completely understand. Try to read and reread this and understand every single thing that is written on this sheet so that way it can be a little bit more easier in our next video. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.